Bankwheezy, good morning, everyone, and thank you for tuning in. I'm Sara Komarnisky, and I'm really happy to be here virtually today with Crystal Gail Fraser to talk about 150 Acts Reconciliation for the NAISA North virtual version of the conference. Today, we're going to talk a little bit about what 150 Acts of Reconciliation is, why we wrote the list, and then walk through some examples of how we've engaged with it before moving on to reflect on kind of our thinking since 2017 and all of that. So right now I'm going to share our screen so that we can get started with the presentation.
Awesome, looks good. Gweenzi, everyone. Thank you so much for tuning in virtually. We're very happy to be here this morning, even though this is a talk about reconciliation and our own journeys. We are big promoters of looking after ourselves and taking the care that we need while we do this work. You know, there are some hard issues and topics that might come up, including the history of Indian residential schools and ongoing forms of colonialism. So please screenshot this slide if you feel like some of these resources might be helpful for you. So of course, the National Indian Residential School Crisis Line, and then a few other ideas there. But a good practice for me is, you know, after I do things like this, or I teach, or, you know, even read about residential schooling or other topics that can be hard, you know, go for a walk, call a friend, have a snack. I'm a big nap person, have a nap. I find that this work is cumulative, and so even though you think that you might be feeling well and doing okay, you know, maybe after the next time you won't be, and I really hope that doesn't happen. And this is why we encourage you to think about these things after a presentation like this. Thanks, Sara.
Yeah, thanks, Crystal. And we like to start off our presentations with a land acknowledgement. And I'm zooming in today from Somvake on Chief Dragi's territory, territory of the Yellowknives Dene First Nation. And right now it's springtime. We're recording this in early May. It's May 4th today, and there's still ice on the lake, but it's melting. It's melting pretty quickly, actually. But the picture on the right on your screen there is from about a month ago when we were ice fishing. I was ice fishing with my family, and that's my daughter there holding a trout. I understand the word for trout is hliwezol, I think. And I was just, you know, really reflecting on how lucky we are to live in a place where you know, where we can go and go fishing and learn the word for that fish. And we also spent an afternoon a couple afternoons actually at the Dechinta fish camp earlier that month. And my daughter had the chance to learn, you know, how to respect the fish as well, how to treat it with care and respect, and be, you know, be in good relation to it, I suppose. And just acknowledging the abundance of the land as well. So that's what I wanted to share for my land acknowledgement today, even though it's a little late for ice fishing like that.
Yeah, that's great, Sara. And, you know, so just a disclosure to viewers, we actually recorded this last week, but had problems with everything tech. I cannot believe that we are not tech experts after 2 years, but yet here we are. And so the photo on the left actually was from a couple weeks ago, and actually on the day that we recorded this last week, we were having here in Edmonton having a pretty giant blizzard, and so that's why I had chosen this photo of a snowy morning. you know, and I'm just so blessed to have lived on Treaty 6 homeland of the Métis Nation for actually almost 20 years, which is just amazing. And we own an acreage about 10 kilometers south of Enoch in West Edmonton. And so often, you know, I think about how our acreage and how our home would have been used historically by Cree and Métis and Lakota Sioux and Dakota, and in particular, you know, right now moose are moving, and so in the past few days I've seen you know, a mom and her baby. I've seen another moose, and in particular, I think those animals have ancestral memory of these lands. And so I think about also how I share my space with them. And so that's my land acknowledgement. My land acknowledgement is never the same every time I give it, which is definitely a practice I would encourage, that we continually think about our relationship with land, and it's not really a box that we can check, or a standard scripted, you know, acknowledgement. That our thinking needs to be ongoing, and how we're in kinship and reciprocity on a daily basis.
I really appreciate you bringing that into this work, Crystal. And you know, every time we do a presentation, we have the chance to reflect and think about where we are and who we are and how we fit in, and look for those moments to share. So so yeah, thank you to you for that. The next piece is we get a chance to introduce ourselves. This is one of my favorite pictures, because this is me and Crystal in her home territory in Siguichik a couple winters ago now, and so that was a real treat to be there together. And anyway, I'm Sara Komarnisky. I'm a mom and a scholar and a settler. I'm married. Like I said, I live here in Denendeh. And yeah, how else do I usually introduce myself? I'm originally from Alberta. My family were Ukrainian settlers to Alberta, and also to what is Treaty 6 and Métis territory, and also Irish and Italian immigrants to first Saskatchewan and then Ontario. And I moved here to Yellowknife in 2019, and I've lived here ever since. Yeah, grateful to be here today.
Thanks, Sara. Shori Crystal Gail Fraser Vilgi, she won cut the Juliet Mary Bullock Shanund Inshu at Bruce Fraser Sheetiate Inshu. Guyatsi Dichu to at Marka Andre Shitshu to Inshu to at Richard Bullock Shitshi to Inshu. Anuvik to at Dechinta Genjik Gwitsa Gwitcha Gwitchin Isli. That's my way of introducing myself in Dinjiju Ginjik. My name is Crystal Fraser. I'm Gwitcha Gwitchin, also of Scottish and English ancestry. I'm originally from Anuvik and Dechinta Genjik in the Northwest Territories, Treaty 11. Yeah, and I'm also married. I have a daughter. She is 6. Her name is Quinn. And I am also an assistant professor at the University of Alberta in history and Native studies. And so super excited to come to this work in this way. And yeah, this really was a special day, Sara, because like, I don't think that I've ever had a friend or colleague kind of in my, you know, hometown of Siguichik like this. That was a really fantastic day. It was also super cold. I think it was like -40.
Yeah, it was super, super cold. But it was a beautiful drive there and a great chance to meet people in the community and have the Crystal Fraser tour of Sigachik and the Delta. And I forgot to say too, even where I work, I'm a research chair, health and community at Aurora College and an adjunct professor of anthropology at the University of Alberta. It's kind of hilarious because usually I do start with where I work, and I think we all do that, but I guess I'm like totally not in that mode as I'm presenting from home today.
Yeah.
Anyway, so Crystal and I, again, we're here to talk about 150 acts of reconciliation. And so to kind of start telling that story, we've got to go back to 2017. Hilariously, in the first recording of this, I kept saying 2015 until mid-presentation when like I realized I had totally gotten the date wrong. And I'm bringing it here just because I think that's really funny because it's been long enough ago now that it's easy to forget the date. But anyway, take yourself back to 2017 when, you know, this was pre-pandemic times, no COVID, but we were in the midst of celebrating Canada's 150th birthday, so-called 150th birthday, I suppose. And so, you know, at that time, if you could take yourself back there were all kinds of party plans and marketing and just overly like kind of celebratory atmosphere, really uncritical kind of celebration mode. And Crystal and I were both at the University of Alberta at that time in the Department of History and Classics, you know, studying different arms of the colonial apparatus and feeling pretty frustrated with that, again, that celebratory and uncritical kind of time. And so, yeah, Crystal, like you were the one who was kind of really thinking about this and starting to note down ideas, right?
Yeah, 2017, Canada 150. It was just everywhere, in your face, on the radio, like on social media, TV, like this is something that needs to be, you know, celebrated in a very intense way. And honestly, like it was pretty annoying. I was like, wait, like what? Like, you know, we were starting to have conversations about statues of John A. Macdonald, but I mean, on the other hand, we were still like very much, you know, subscribing to the celebration of the settler state and like 150 years of colonialism. So, you know, I noticed myself becoming like a little bit agitated and angry about the things that I was seeing, because everything that I knew to be right was not being talked about. It was being ignored and glossed over. And I mean, in particular, you know, when I got wind that, you know, the birthday party in Ottawa, like just Ottawa, not anywhere else, but the birthday party in Ottawa was going to be $500 million, like $500 million with a B. And I'm like, you know, every Indigenous community could have clean drinking water for that. Every school on reserve could have the same level of education that every other settler Canadian enjoys. But, you know, you can only be angry for so long, really. And this is actually one of the things that my grandma taught me, was to channel my anger into doing good things. And so this is where I just started a list of, in general, like what people could do in this country in order to make better conditions for Indigenous peoples. And yeah, that's how this list started. And then I thought, well, you know what, like this could be actually something really bigger. And I'm pretty sure reconciliation does not mean doing things alone. And I also did not want to do this alone. I'm all about collaboration. I think that collaboration is a fun way to grow and to come up with new ideas, but also like in a way to share labor and be equitable on topics that are very hard. And so that's when, you know, I invited Sara to have a conversation about this.
Yeah, and I'm so grateful that you did, Crystal. We were both like, yeah, like relatively new parents at that time, and we would get together in the evening, or collaborate on a Google Doc and really just start brainstorming of kind of everyday sorts of actions, pretty much anybody could take towards reconciliation. And of course, really inspired by the really important work of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, and acknowledging the calls to action, the 94 calls to action that, chart a path forward. But, these were ideas that, that everyday acts that the average Canadian could take on, and bring into their life to move in a good direction as well. And so, yeah, we started brainstorming. Some of them, were kind of jokes, and some of them weren't, and some were really serious, and some were like maybe we were trying to push the envelope a little bit. I don't know, but we wanted to get to 150 because Crystal had the idea to release the list on August 4th, when there would be 150 days left in the 150th birthday year. And so yeah, we were able to do that, and we were able to make things action, so that it wasn't only like, I mean, there's a lot of acts that are about reading things and learning things, but then there are also things that are intended to, spark other kinds of actions too, as you'll see if you visit the site here and read the list. And we've got some beautiful art by Angela Starrett there, and you can download a version and whatever you'd like. Another interesting thing is we wanted to see it in one of our national newspapers, but they weren't really interested in publishing it. And so we're really grateful for Active History for stepping in to host the list, and it lives there still today. And so I think in some ways that's ended up being a better spot to put it, because it continues to resonate, I think, and be accessed by people and brought into their learning, their work, whatever they're doing, however they find this useful.
Mm-hmm.
It was also translated into French. So there's a sibling site to Active History called Histoire Engagée. And that was an interesting process too, because I think we had to find links in French that kind of were similar to the ones that we'd linked to in English, and work with the translators a little bit on language and all of that. So if you parlez français, you can check it out on Histoire Engagée too. Oh, so now we're going to move into the section of the presentation where we talk about, a few acts that have resonated with us recently, and walk through how we've approached those. Because again, or as we've said, not again, because I haven't said it in this presentation, but I have said it in other presentations, that this list was for others. Like, we wrote it in general for especially settler Canadians, to encourage people to take action, bring reconciliation into their everyday lives. But we also kind of wrote the list for ourselves too, as as individuals working through these things in our own lives and families, and through our work and all of that. So to kind of show that process a little bit, we're gonna talk it through some acts that resonate with us. And Crystal's gonna go first.
Awesome, thanks, Sara. Yeah, so I mean, we haven't done all of the acts ourselves, and we find opportunities just in our daily lives to incorporate this. And as Sara had mentioned, like, this list was really meant for individuals to bring reconciliation to the workplace, to their office, same thing as workplace, to their families, to their church gatherings, to teach their children. And so reconciliation, like, doesn't need to be a super hard thing, in the sense that, like, you don't need to parcel out a bunch of time for it. There's ways to incorporate it every single day in small ways that seem manageable and doable. And so number 27 has been an important one for me. So yeah, I am an intergenerational residential school survivor, meaning that I did not go to residential school, but my grandmother and my mother were institutionalized. And so this was really important to teach my daughter about residential schools. And this kind of education would provide some of the background, you know, when she asks the harder questions like, you know, why don't we speak our language? And so number 27 is to buy books for your children that explain the histories and legacies of residential school. And of course, you know, in the past, we've had Orange Shirt Day, wearing my orange shirt, which is now the new National Day for Truth and Reconciliation. And that's always a great day to start conversations, but there are also 364 other days of the year, which are also great days to start conversations. And so I have a favorite here. Well, these are my favorites. So we have probably about a dozen children's books about residential schools, and these are the ones that we like to read all the time. So Not My Girl is a really you know, emotional story about residential schooling in the North. You Hold Me Up is a fantastic read about reconciliation and compassion. And then Phyllis's Orange Shirt, which of course tells the story about Phyllis Webstad being institutionalized and not being able to wear the orange shirt that her mother had sent her with. So I mean, collectively, all of these titles have been amazing. And what is super cool is once you start reading with your child, you know, stories are a good way to talk about this harder content. This is what we hear, is that a lot of people just don't know how to talk about these things. And so stories is a good way, but also my daughter has brought these stories for show and tell at her school. And so it's content that she is familiar with. She talks about it. Yeah, and so number 27, I think is just fantastic. It's also fun, like, you know, having them just kind of laying around the house, like having them easy to pick up and read. Again, like, you're not making a big deal of something. It doesn't have to be for a special reason on a special day. Yeah, so number 27, one of my favorites.
I love that one too, and especially the Phyllis's Orange Shirt is a big favorite in my house. And I think, you know, again, as a white settler, it creates that space for conversation with my kids, where and you know, kids that come over to play, if they grab the book off the shelf, like, kids can learn hard things and understand them. And I really believe those books are a good place to start. Must-see, Crystal.
Thanks, Sarah. Yeah, and so my next favorite act, number 4, attend a cultural event or participate in a cultural activity. And so, you know, coming from Inuvik, so as I mentioned, I'm Gwich'in, but also, like, historically, we have like a long relationship with Inuvialuit, Inupiat, Inuit, and that continues today in Inuvik. It is primarily a Gwich'in Inuvialuit community. And I was fortunate enough when I went to school in Inuvik that, you know, I was able to take Inuvialuktun classes. I was able to visit whale camps. I was able to take part in not only my own culture as a child on a very regular basis, but also share those experiences with Inuit families as well. But one of the things that I never really got to do is to learn how to make my own Atadalic. And so as you get older, you know, it was perhaps an expectation that you would learn how to sew, that you would be able to make these kinds of items for yourself and your family. And so a few years ago, I was in Inuvik at a conference, and I had met this individual on the left from Ulahuktuk, and we got talking about Atadalics, and I think, like, I naively said, oh, I never learned how to make one. There's never, enough time, of course, making excuses. And her ability and expertise as an artist and sewer just like blew my mind, because she looked at me like up and down. She sized me up and got out, her scissors and fabric from her backpack and cut me a pattern, like just based on how I looked, which was amazing. I think about her all the time still. And so learning how to put that together, just like knowing that our ancestors, that like people who came before me also would have engaged in that activity, was super special. And then on the right here, I actually have a very recent, newer Atadalic that I was gifted just before Christmas by Dr. Sharon Firth. And so also, like, that Atadalic that I got from Sharon also opened up new teachings about reciprocity, about how we support and lean on each other, both personally and professionally, and just how we care for people through our artistry. Yeah, so number 4, that's a favorite for me, my Atadalic.
Oh, so awesome, and a gorgeous photo of you too.
Thanks. Okay, and then finally, so I know this may be like as a plug for the University of Alberta, because I work here. So, I mean, it probably is. However, even before I worked here, I took the online MOOC Indigenous Canada, which is amazing. So it is free. Anyone is available to take it. And it's basically an 8-module course where you learn a lot about Indigenous history. You learn about the treaties. You also learn about contemporary issues. And at the time when I took this course, I was in the middle of my PhD. And Sara, you and I have talked about this because you have also taken this course, is that, just because you have a PhD in something, I mean, I am Indigenous. I still learned a ton from this course. It was absolutely amazing. And of course, now I'm in the super cool position where I'm actually teaching this course. You can also take it for university credit. And so I have been the instructor, and I think 2 years ago now at U of A, it was a really special time for this MOOC, because after Dan Levy from Schitt's Creek had signed on, and he was taking the course in a very public way. They were doing live broadcasts on Instagram every Sunday. I believe you can still find those on YouTube, and just really in conversation about what it was like for a settler to work through this content in a public way. And then, of course, in the picture here, that is supposed to be Dan Levy outside of the teepee, outside of the Faculty of Native Studies here at the U of A.
Yeah, those video conversations with the instructors and Dan Levy and like guests to come and share specific things are like a really fun addition to the programming. Well, like fun, but also meaningful. Like they do have a lot of fun in those. It's good to watch.
Yeah.
Well, thanks, Crystal. Yeah, we're going to move on to some acts that really resonate with me. And like I said, I'm a white settler of Ukrainian and Irish and Italian heritage. And so one that's been important for me over the years is learning family history and knowing where your ancestors came from and when they arrived in Canada, but not that one on its own. It's really important to situate those learnings like within a larger system that sought to dispossess Indigenous peoples from their ancestral lands. So basically understanding who you are and where you've come from and how you've ended up being here on these lands, if you're a settler or an immigrant too, and how that relates to the Indigenous peoples there and in the spaces where your family lived and moved through. And I think in our case, you know, this photo is from basically the end of our driveway where I grew up. In Treaty 6 and Métis territory, and thinking about how you know, ancestors of mine that arrived at a time when the land was being cleared for settlers, like my family members, and Indigenous peoples were increasingly confined to reserves. And how I recently learned that, like in my family's case, a whole extended family came together. So the parents, their adult children, they all moved together as a group. And again, at a time where residential schools were being established and Indigenous families were being intentionally separated from one another. And I say that not to necessarily, like, it's not about feeling guilty, but it is about understanding those links and looking for how to tell those stories about ourselves in relation to each other, right? And oftentimes you don't see or hear this in the typical kind of settler narratives, right? Like where I grew up, there's the Ukrainian Cultural Heritage Center, and it's like kind of like a mini outdoor museum that shows, like, you know, the lives of early Ukrainian settlers. But until, like, even so, I think Indigenous peoples are pretty absent from that space for the most part, unless they've changed things. It has been a while since I've been there, but you know, so too in the stories of settlers, you often hear, like, you know, we came, we thrived, we prospered, all of this. But there are ways to look for those relationships too, or understand how they were intentionally, like, not created because of these state policies, for lack of a better word. I hope I'm making sense there. I think too, like, there's a chance to look for links between peoples as well, and learn from those, and learn to understand those, and learn to bring those forward into the future. And there's some great work going on at the University of Alberta, I understand. Another plug for the University of Alberta, but like really, like, it's Indigenous and Ukrainians getting together to talk about, like, how do we come together as peoples, right? When, you know, we've shared this land, but, you know, there's also been a lot of racism from Ukrainians to Indigenous peoples, but there are these links between families and communities. And so how can we build and learn from those to move forward together in a better way? And I can't remember the link right now, but you could look it up, I think, through MacEwan University, actually, as well. They're a partner too. Anyway, enough on that. But yeah, learn and understand who you are and where you're coming from and how you relate to all of this in your own family history. Oh yeah, another one I wanted to talk about was language. And I talked about the fish, the fish earlier, and the chance to learn and use language. And I think I'm here really lucky to be in a space where there's opportunities to learn the language. For example, on Wednesdays, the Tk'emlúps government has a free language lesson that anybody can attend and learn and practice Tk'emlúps. And you know, this stop sign is right by my house. It's got Willowday language on it. And so, you know, you can take the steps to learn how to pronounce those words, to understand what they mean. And I think it's really important to take those opportunities to do that. On the left-hand side too, this is from back when Quinn and Crystal were learning Gwich'in together, and that's Quinn, Crystal's daughter, and Crystal's mentor, Agnes. And they're learning, they were learning Gwich'in together. And so that's another thing. And Crystal and Quinn invited me and my daughter to participate in that as well. And we were able to learn words in the language and you know, try to bring them into everyday life. Although it's, I have to say, like, often really awkward. Once my teacher was like, "You speak Tk'emlúps like a white lady," and I was like, at first I was like, I'm doing it wrong. And then I was like, no, wait, like, I do speak Tk'emlúps like a white lady. Like, I can own that for sure. but it's nice to get to a space where, you know, at the very least, you know, you can pronounce words in the local language. You can broaden your learning from there, and maybe even start to pick up words here and there. I always feel good if I'm listening to the Indigenous languages on CBC and I can understand something. And then the last one I wanted to speak to was, you know, moving to a new place. And so I moved here to, like I said, to Denendeh in I think it was 2018 or 2019. I'm terrible with dates, obviously, as I've shared already. But I think moving to a new space is kind of like starting the list all over again in a lot of ways. And I think one of the things that that I like about these acts of reconciliation is it's, you know, just a guide to how to be in a place, like what steps could you take, right? And so starting the list all over again to take steps to learn where I am, what language people speak, how do I act respectfully towards the land and the animals and the people here, and how can I do that in an everyday way, I think is how I feel about that. And in my work too, right? I work as a researcher at Aurora College, and so I'm able to bring this into my work pretty profoundly. And in my personal life, like, you know, looking for some place to live and thinking about, you know, buying a home or renting a home, and the backstory is to that little piece of real estate, who used to live there centuries ago or more recently. And I recently saw a really neat map that the Yellowknife Dene First Nation had posted on their Facebook that, you know, it showed the land of the city of Yellowknife, but like the city wasn't there at all. It showed like the trails that people used and the names of different landmarks, and also like settlement places where people would have camped and lived at different seasons. And it was a really cool way to like look at this landscape in a new way. Anyway, so my point on this slide is kind of moving someplace new is like starting the list all over again. And so I think Crystal said earlier, like, we haven't completed all of the acts on the list. And I think in some ways it's impossible, because as you learn and grow or move and change, you come back to things in a bit of a different way.
Well, and I mean, Sara, I think that is a brilliant segue into the next slide, because I mean, in reality, this list from 2017, like that, this list is a snapshot in time of our thinking. And since 2017, like over the last 5 years, like 5 years on the one hand, like honestly went by in a little bit of a blink. I can't believe it's been 5 years. But then on the other hand, I think that in many ways, our thinking about the list has actually profoundly changed. And there are many things, many acts that we might, you know, want to update or want to have a conversation about. And that's the thing that is hard, I suppose, about this is that I think one of the reasons why it resonated so well with people is because it was like 150 like one-liners, like, you know, go do this, right? But it really failed to capture the nuance and the complexity and the conversations about those acts. And so, yeah, we've had lots of people like ask us, oh, are you going to do another list? And it's always like, no, we aren't. I mean, that is like by design why act number 150 was like, okay, now like you go off and do your own acts and like add to ours kind of thing. And we still really invite that, but we were also struggling with how to share our current thinking about the list. And this is why we decided to focus a little bit on this presentation about how we feel about the list, what we might have changed, you know, how colonialism is ongoing. I mean, despite the closure of residential schools, despite the TRC, you know, despite the national report for missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls, I mean, there's a lot of good stuff that has happened, but there is also still, like, in a way, very dire conditions for Indigenous peoples in what is now known as Canada.
Yeah, thank you for that, Crystal. And I think too, like you're right, it's that balance between kind of, you know, I joke sometimes it's the no excuses list. There's something on there that actually like everybody should be able to engage with, right? So that kind of level of invitation, I suppose, but as well, like acknowledging those complexities and those nuances there. You know, you're kind of, I think in the original list, we put the onus on people to do the work, right? And I think I really appreciate the presentation space and being invited to do these presentations or signing up to do these presentations, because it always gives us a chance to work through these things and really like, you know, this slide is about like, yeah, you know, asking really reconciliation since Canada 150 and what does that look like? And oftentimes we revise the wording of the acts to update our more current thinking. And I think you'll see that a little bit later on. But anyway, this slide is like a Northern perspective on what reconciliation maybe has looked like since Canada 150. And I think, you know, nationally, there have been many things that have happened since 2017, like, you know, the murder of Colton Bushy, one, and our government bought a pipeline, and multiple deaths of Indigenous peoples at the hands of the healthcare system, like Brian Sinclair inquiry happened, and Joyce Echaquan, as well as here in the Northwest Territories. We hear this as well, but we put a few things up that are relevant to the Northern context, and I put up the one on the top right, I guess that's the residents, the Aurora College residents in Fort Smith. That's the old residential school hostel, so it's the same building there, still standing and still used as a residence. But then on the other hand, on the lower left, we've got a picture from Tl'imlúps, who just recently announced Tl'imlúps First Nation they're starting their own research licensing process, and like, you know, having sovereignty in that to control research on their lands, and take control of that. So, you know, we can kind of see those things. And I know Crystal is going to point to some of the other ones on the slide here too.
Yeah, for sure. So, I mean, in the news this year has been really the unsafe drinking water in Tk'emlúps and what that has meant for that community. But that is just reflective of the many Indigenous communities in Canada that still do not have clean drinking water, despite, you know, election and government promises. We have ongoing complicated relationships with policing bodies like the RCMP. You know, last year there was on a couple of occasions, you know, very troubling video footage released of RCMP interactions with Indigenous people. You know, here's a satellite in Inuvik, really representative of you know, low bandwidth, poor internet at really high costs in the north, which is absolutely unacceptable. And then a photo here from a CBC News story on the right about climate demonstration in Whitehorse. So absolutely a lot going on nationally, territorially, and really, you know, even though we identify these things as a problem, one of the critiques that I have come to make is that we tend to treat these things as individual problems. We don't really talk about how it is that this is ongoing colonialism, how this is linked into thought about white supremacy and the, you know, continued racialization of our communities that just is is not serving us.
Yeah, thank you for that. Lots has happened, and lots that, like, if we were to go ahead and write today, like, I think there would be, it would be somewhat of a different list. Like, it's a product of its time, I guess, but you know, in a way that points towards all of these things too. I mean, this is where it's led our thinking, right, Crystal?
Yeah, totally. Yeah, and you know, so my work as a historian, as an Indigenous studies scholar, looking at histories about residential schooling across the North, you know, this is what I've come to learn, and this is definitely reflective in my own experience, is that, you know, my family and we didn't talk anything about residential schools. I mean, honestly, so growing up in Inuvik, going to Sam's school, you know, taking the Inuvialuktun classes, having like outdoor on the land programming, wearing my mucklucks to school every day, like I'm all very grateful for that. Northern studies courses, amazing. But I didn't learn about residential schools until my university experience in my 20s. I didn't learn about treaties. And so I think, well, I'm not sure, but I think that there may be people who can resonate with that experience. And I mean, even though in recent years, you know, we've had the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, we've talked about residential schools really on a national level, but I really think there's still a lot of education that needs to be done around this. And so, you know, I took just a very small sampling of residential schools across the North. And so like Brainett Hall, Grolier Hall, and Stringer Hall in Inuvik, which, by the way, I will say that this use of the word hall or hostel or residence was actually a very strategic plan by the federal government in the 1950s. They knew that Indian residential schools had a pretty crappy reputation, that a lot of children had died there, and that parents were not on board with residential schools. And so this was the government's opportunity to introduce a benign descriptor. Like, nobody wanted residential schools, but what about a hall or a hostel? That seemed acceptable. You know, St. Paul Hostel in Yukon. Sorry, I can't remember how to pronounce this one on the bottom, from Nunavut and Chesterfield Inlet. But then also understanding how our people, how our ancestors were also shipped away in different ways. And so children left communities en masse for residential schools, but so did adults through the need of medical treatment. And so here we have, you know, the Charles Camsell Indian Hospital here in Edmonton, where many of our relatives went for years upon years at a time. Some of them never came home. And we're now understanding that Indian sanatoria and hospitals, like the Charles Camsell, functioned in many ways like residential schools. You know, removed from your community and your lands, forced to learn English. You also studied, you know, Alberta curriculum from your bedside. And it was, you know, hospitals were also sites of violence and bodily crimes. Yeah, so this is all to say that I think there's a lot of work that still needs to be done. But of course, you know, in a way that feels good and is right for us, because a lot of these kinds of histories are so personal and also painful.
Yeah, thank you so much for that, Crystal.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that brings me to apologies and reconciliation. So on May 27th of this year will be the 1-year anniversary of when the news broke out of Tk'emlúps of the 215 or so unmarked graves at the former Tk'emlúps Indian residential school. And really having done, you know, over 100 media engagements over the last 11 months talking about unmarked graves and residential schools, that has definitely been a journey, like a lot of ups and downs and surprises along the way. But again, what has been very clear is that a lot of people still don't know about residential schools. Unmarked Graves was a shock to many Canadians, whereas for Indigenous communities, you know, we've known for decades that our ancestors and direct family members did not come home, sometimes without an answer. And in some cases, you know, like in Fort Providence, we've known about unmarked graves for a long time. But again, it's one of those things that, oh, well, now we have ground penetrating radar, now we have Western science, they'll finally believe us, right? And so that's been a little bit of a journey too. And one of the results of the unmarked graves is this call again for an apology from the Pope. And to be fully transparent, I did not think that apology was going to happen. You know, I had genuinely thought that the apology would have already come if it was going to happen. But I also knew that the apology from the Pope would be very, very meaningful for a lot of survivors. So I'm happy it did happen. I mean, maybe another time over coffee, like we can unpack, like, you know, what that apology actually was. But this is all to say is that a lot of people view this apology as the next step in reconciliation. I mean, personally and professionally, I suppose, I kind of think we need to backtrack a little bit and still like do the truth searching a little bit more before we dive in with both feet on reconciliation. But I also think that the two things can happen at the same time. Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. And I think, like, you know, we don't like, we as individuals don't need to wait for that either. We can start doing work as individuals and in our workplaces and in our communities and in our families as well. Like that's the point. And you know, then you come to hearing an apology like that, and understanding the context better as well. If you've done some work, like if you're a settler like me and you've done some learning, and then you can follow that story. Yeah. Anyway, this slide totally makes me laugh. Crystal put this emoji on it, and I was flipping through the slides and just got to this one and kind of broke out laughing. It still kind of makes me giggle. But yeah, I think, you know, as we're kind of talking about, we're feeling mixed. Like, we're grateful that there's still a role for this work to happen, and people taking up reconciliation, and also, like, you know, there's still a lot to do, basically. Like there's a lot of things, the ongoing kind of colonial violence and white supremacist foundation of our society. We're still really reckoning with that. And even the truth, like Crystal said, there's still so much truth there to tell, I think. Yeah. So
Yeah.
Yeah.
I see we're quickly running out of time. So maybe the next slide, Sara.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. And this one here, we were talking about how we're differentially positioned in a way in this work. Like, I'm a Southerner, grew up in Alberta, and now living in the North. And Crystal's a Northerner, now living in the South and maintaining strong connections here, right? And so we wanted to reflect a little bit on what that's like. And I have a picture up there from last year, so almost a year ago, on June 4th, there was a memorial walk and ceremony here to honor the 215 children from the Tk'emlúps Indian Residential School that were located by Tk'emlúps Secwe First Nation. And so I think, I don't know, like for me, you know, being there, participating in an event like that, like, really meaningful to be there and witness and join with others in this space. And I would say, like, you know, I look for those. Like, this is why, like, I'm trying to learn the language. I'm trying to learn how to be here, because I don't, you know, I'm new. Like I said, need to start the list all over again. I need to learn how to be here. I need to know what, you know, I need to do that. And so that's why I put that picture up there, because it reminds me of the importance of gathering together, of witnessing, of being there, you know, with an open heart to learn, I guess.
Yeah, I think that's amazing. And like this concept of just having an open heart, like for me, that means being vulnerable. And sometimes, you know, I think one of our acts, I can't remember the number, but it was like talk less and listen more. And that still really resonates for me. I also remember seeing this meme, I think on Instagram, where it was basically like, you're not always right, accept it, kind of thing. Yeah. And so I think, like, even for me, like, you know, we don't have everything figured out, and that is okay. And like, I'm very grateful that, like, especially for my elders who like will pretty consistently remind me that I don't have things figured out, which, I mean, is actually in direct opposition to academia, to everything in my job. And maybe you'll resonate with this, Sara, is that, like, in our jobs, we are taught that, like, speaking with authority is the way to go, that, like, you have to be the leader in your field, like, you should know everything. But in reality, like, that's actually not doing anyone any service. That we need opportunities for growth. And also, a part of our education is unlearning. We have to unlearn certain things in order to get to truth. But I'm going off on a tangent here. So my half of the slide, it's been really hard for me with COVID, not being able to travel north. And I mean, you know, even now, like, I know the north is technically open and stuff, but still, like, I don't want to contribute to anything, you know, in smaller communities, especially. But one of the things that has gotten me through this over the past 2 years is thinking about my great grandmother, Julian Fedaycha, shown here. Fedaycha means one who carries a feather, also known as Julian Andre. And I mean, like, she drove dog team, like, from the Sesquicentennial area all the way to Alaska, and just all over the place. She was like a language expert, spoke many languages, a trapper, had many children, most who were institutionalized at residential school. And so I've been thinking about her and her mobility, and, like, also knowing that if I'm away from my land for extended periods of time, that, like, that's still okay. I have those connections. I have community. We do language lessons on Zoom, like, all kinds of fantastic things. But recently, at the end of March, I did have the opportunity to go to Yellowknife, first research trip in probably 2.5 years, and went to the archives, and just by accident, I found the box with transcripts of oral histories, which was just amazing, because if anyone is familiar with archives, you will know that 99% of archival documents are written by white men who represent either church or government. Indigenous people, particularly women, we aren't really in the archive. Our stories aren't necessarily important enough. So my first trip back north, I found this box, which was just like a surprise, and also, like, so meaningful that I had to include it here.
Oh, I love that. And thank goodness you made it. You made it here. It was great to see you on that trip. And I guess I should say too, in these next few slides, I'm going to move through them really quickly, but we're going to send along the slides to post so you can check them out. hopefully online. Also, Crystal and I will be at NAISA here in Yellowknife and in Whitehorse too. And so, you know, we're open to talking more about this anytime you'd like. I think we have one here that's some suggestions for acts you could take up as a community member in your community. And again, those kind of italicized wordings are like our reconfiguration of some of the original acts as our thinking has changed. And we have one for scholars too. So ideas where you can engage as a scholar or just where to start. We do this in all of our presentations. We kind of pull out a few acts for people because they may not have time to read the whole list like before our presentation or something like that. So during, it's a chance to see like, what do these acts look like anyway beyond the ones that we pulled out. Another way to well, I guess this is a poster. I'm skipping ahead to the posters, but I think at the end of the day, like, you know, this act number 149, this is the second to last act that says that reconciliation is not about feeling guilty. It's about knowledge, action, and justice. And I've heard Crystal say before, like, you know, you might feel guilty. And like, I've sure I've felt guilty sometimes, but that's not the intention of any the exercise is to get kind of stuck in guilt or shame or those feelings, right? It's about moving through those towards knowledge, right? Towards action and towards justice. And so we're grateful to have beautiful artwork for this project by Lianne Charlie. And so this is one that she did for that act specifically. If you're interested in buying posters, we do sell posters with all 150 acts, and we've got a website there for you to check out and purchase from. And all proceeds from these posters do go to supporting Indigenous students at the University of Alberta. There's a scholarship that we were lucky to establish, and you can learn a bit more about that on our website as well. Yeah, so this is it. We've come to the end of our conversation. I think we might have gone a little bit over time again. So thank you everyone for sticking it through and watching this. And I guess to close, like, we just want to invite you to engage in this with us. What act of reconciliation could you take on, or how might you add to it? And this is an open invitation to go on social media with the hashtag 150 acts. I thought I fixed this slide, but look, now it's under those images again. But basically, we'll keep an eye on social media on the hashtag 150 acts and invite you to participate with us.
Yeah, really looking forward to hearing your ideas. Also, you know, come talk to us in Whitehorse and Yellowknife at NAISA. Also, I think on our last slide is our email address, 150acts@gmail.com. We're so very grateful for the relationships that this work has really opened up and that we've built, and you know, the desire for ongoing conversations. This was exactly the point of this work, and we're just very happy that it's been received in that way.
Yeah, I'm so grateful for this, and I'm grateful for all of you again for tuning in, to the team at Dechinta for organizing the NAISA virtual conference and for the chance to participate in that, and to you, Crystal. Right, this is always such a fun conversation. So thanks to you for all of the heart and insight that you bring to this. It's such a great partnership.
Yeah, I agree. Thanks, Sara. Thanks,
Okay.
everyone. We will see you at NAISA.
Bye.